up, everybody? This is Josh Lyles. I'm the founder over at Sales-CRM. Today, I'm joined by Lacey Olson. Lacey's become one of my friends that I've met through the industry from some of the TIA events out of Minnesota. Lacey's the owner of Transport Express. Lacey, how are you doing today? Good to see you.
I'm doing pretty good, Josh. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Glad to have you to be able to kind of share with our audience because you've got a unique story, one of the more unique ones that I've at least come across. And especially like with all the teams that we work with at Sales Dash, but just in general for I think anybody in the industry. Number one, for anybody that doesn't watch on camera here, you've got, I would say, the coolest hair in freight. You always have some unique color going on all the time, so I will give you props for that. But yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're the owner of Transport Express, but you didn't come from freight originally. And so you're not going to hear the story that often where somebody goes and, buys a trucking company or a brokerage that hasn't been in it before. So let's start there. We'll transition obviously to, pre-story and whatnot, but would love to learn a little bit more about what made you even make that move.
Well, I come from entrepreneurs and I tried really hard not to be an entrepreneur. Actually really didn't want this life. I didn't think anyways. So in 2021, my husband and I, we have a concrete and masonry business, and then a small real estate investment, kind of single family rental thing that we dabble with, I guess. And we knew that we wanted to buy another entity because we started one from scratch, and that's a lot of work, which I'm sure you can relate to. And so we were looking to acquire something, and preferably outside of the industry that we were already fairly concentrated in, from like a construction and like real estate realm. We felt like we were just a little heavy there. And this was brought to us by actually my brother and his wife. They're like, hey, this deal came along. We can't do it alone. What do you guys say? And we looked it over. I said, what's a transportation brokerage? And somebody was like, they're basically a travel agent for freight. And I'm like, okay, yeah, business is business. That seems simple enough. And so we jumped in head first, and we acquired Transport Express in November of 2021. Okay. The company itself has been around since 1991 with only one previous owner.
So with in the concrete space and everything that you were doing before, what was kind of your, like for you specifically, like your roles and responsibilities? Like where was your skill set? What did you like to do?
I actually, so I'm going to rewind a little bit further, Josh, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I loved school. I loved learning. I was a straight A student. I was the smart kid. Went off to college. We'll just say I majored in partying. Technically, I came away with a psychology degree and a music minor. Came home, was like, I just need a job. Didn't want to work for my dad. He owned multiple businesses. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm kind of not going to do that, Dad, where he had started all of his entities. He had a general contracting company, a land development company, a custom home designing company. Like I said, entrepreneurs. I come by it. It's in my blood. So I started working for a large bank, actually, in the investment realm. And I passed my Series 7 and my Series 66. So I was actually licensed to advise, was kind of taking my steps to go into being a financial broker, and then 2008 happened. And so that really changed everything. Actually, my parents lost everything because they were in that housing market. And my functionality within the company that I worked for relocated to St. Louis. There was an acquisition, and their functionality within the investment was way bigger than ours. And my husband and I had just bought our first home, and I was like, I'm not moving. Also, don't want to go to St. Louis. Minneapolis is pretty great. So I switched. I moved kind of within that banking institution, staying within the investment realm until I went into the mortgage area. And we decided to start a family. And I knew that this large corporation was just sucking the soul out of me. It was really hard for me to go day in and day out and know that I was just a cog in a wheel, and the impact that I was having was minimal at best. And so I decided that, when our first child came, it was going to be a jumping off point. Either I was going to stay home and raise the family, or I was just going to use this as a fresh start somewhere else. And really truly felt called to stay home. I knew that I was where I was supposed to be. And so I actually was home for 8.5 years. And prior to doing that, though, I did get my master's in business.
Okay.
And so when my husband decided to start our concrete and masonry business in 2010, I was able to kind of support him more in a consultative kind of role, but I wasn't active in that business. I spent 8.5 years home with our kids. We have 3 boys. They're awesome and insane. And yeah, it's basically Lord of the Flies at our house most of the time, if I'm being totally honest.
How old's the youngest? How old's the oldest?
7, 9, and 11. So we are
Okay.
in the thick of it. And so kind of in there, we got into, I'm sure you've heard of Robert Kiyosaki. I know he's kind of a controversial figure now, but his Rich Dad, Poor Dad, actually, this is going to sound really nerdy, but me and Matt, my husband's favorite game to play is Cash Flow, which was the game designed by Robert Kiyosaki to help you kind of put his theories into practice. So many a Friday night, we'd be sitting there drinking Manhattans, playing Cash Flow on the living room floor. And it
Just a board game?
Just a board game. Like, it is
Okay.
made in the 90s. It is cheesy as heck. But if you're somebody who kind of likes to dabble and understands like getting out of the rat race, essentially, this has been really just a fun way to bring us some of those concepts home and
No, that's
solidify
interesting.
them.
I'm the nerd on the plane that plays like Sudoku and Monopoly, so
Me too.
I haven't heard of Cash Flow, but I'll check it out. That sounds cool.
It is fun. And you can actually, like, we played it with our nephew who's, well, he's graduating from high school now, but when he was a preteen, like, it's something you can teach your kids too and help them understand kind of this concept of investing in things that create income for you in the future without you having to show up 9 to 5 kind of a deal. So in that, we got into the real estate rental property thing. I had time, so I was the one looking at properties, analyzing how much work needed to go in them. Thankfully, I come from a construction background, so this wasn't a foreign language to me. And so that in that 8.5 years, like, most of my time was managing my household and the logistics of children and all of that. But basically, I'm a problem solver, right? And so when it came down to the decision of if I could step into a leadership role within another company, I kind of figured I love to learn, and why not? I can figure most anything out.
Very interesting.
And then we bought in 2021.
Love it. All right, so I want to go back to one thing that you said though before we like transition into back to freight here. You said that you tried hard not to be an entrepreneur. Is that because, like you said, it came from it family wise with your dad, or was it just the stuff of the lifestyle of being? Because I mean, there's the reason why I find that interesting is because there's so many people that are like, the dream is to start my own business, run my own thing, and have the freedom and everything. But I also think a lot of people don't understand how much work goes into it, and that you honestly may probably actually work more, and obviously like carry more weight, pressure on your shoulders and stuff and whatnot. So sometimes I think like people can lose sight of that. But what was it for you where you were actually trying? You're an entrepreneur now, but why did you try not to be one?
I mean, kind of what you said, Josh. My father was an entrepreneur, and he was a great dad. He is a great dad, but he was gone a lot. Work really dictated his schedule. And so in his attempt to free himself from the constraints of working for somebody else, he sort of built his own prison, right? Where he was then a slave to the business that he owned. And really, I'm not saying this in judgment. I'm just saying it in a way that I knew wasn't the life for me. I didn't want to feel like everything I did revolved around my business. And then also the fact that my parents owned the business together. And so I watched their relationship kind of evolve over the years, and seeing how their commonalities were us as kids and their company. I'm sure there was more there. I'm coming from the lens of a child, right? But then also watching 2008, like my dad had to file bankruptcy. Like, they lost everything. They lost my childhood home. They lost their cabin. I mean, he did really well for himself. We had 2 private planes. Like, we weren't jet setters. He just really wanted to be a private pilot. And so managed to get a float plane and then a cute little twin engine Cessna thing that when they would come visit me at college, they would fly down. It was a 3-hour drive or a 45-minute flight. So don't get me wrong. I understand how privilege that is, but they lost everything. Like my dad had to take a job with Burlington Northern and move to Aberdeen, South Dakota, just to provide for my mom and my little sister who were still at home.
So I guess how has that changed your approach to motherhood, running your own business and your own logistics company?
Thank you for asking. That's actually a question that I love answering. And I had no less than 5 conversations at Capital Ideas this last April with other people who are highly motivated. I have to put first things first, right? So for me, that is my children. We chose to start a family, so they are therefore my priority. And this idea of how can I show up in my best form for them, and balancing that with the weight of knowing that there are, between the 2 businesses, we've got 30 families that depend on us to maintain these businesses for their well-being, for their children's well-being, for their lifestyles. And so the way that it's kind of formed me as an entrepreneur is I actually only work about 20 hours a week in the office. I don't take meetings on Mondays, so I create space for myself there to kind of accomplish those things that are hard to fit. They're important, but not urgent, right? To steal Stephen Covey's words. And then I don't work on Fridays. So during the school year, Fridays are kind of for me, but in the summer, me and the kids we call it Friday fun. And we either go on an adventure somewhere or we invite other families. We live on a little lake, and I'll invite like another mom and kids over and I'll take them tubing for a couple hours, kind of a deal. And so for me as an entrepreneur, like there's a lot of tension sitting there and holding the business back, essentially. Like I have to wrestle with that constantly, that because I'm choosing to only put this much of myself into the business, the progress that we're going to make will be slower. It will still be there. But I am a very intense person and I am all or nothing. Like, hello, hi, I'm intense. And I embrace that, right? I've learned to embrace that over the years. And so for me, I'm just really passionate about you can be an entrepreneur and not have it take over your life. And that's even a thing like Matt struggles with, because starting a business from the ground up, he's done a really good job of working his way out of the business with help from a business coach, kind of helping guide him, like replacing himself so he can get more to that CEO/board member type of engagement. Right now, he's just really involved in the day-to-day, and I'm not at this business. And so for me, watching my dad not be present in my childhood in the way that I would have loved for him to show up more. And then coupling that with balancing what we're investing our time in. So we've got the concrete and now we've got the transportation, right? So watching 2008, my dad lost everything because it was all in one industry. And so as we're, kind of deciding where we're going to go next, it's how do we balance this, right? This transportation thing in our minds was a strategic move to balance away from that construction oriented kind of focus that we had.
So with you saying, hey, I know you're an intense person and the progress being slower, I'm very interested on your kind of take and opinion on that, because to me, like the one thing that's been really interesting from myself being in a couple other industries before freight, because there's some people where like freight's all they know. And, a lot of these companies and people are very just like, they're so focused on just growth at all costs. It feels like, essentially, right? And, you can be at the conferences and it almost feels like it's just like a big size up contest. Maybe not. At least that's kind of the way I sort of interpret it every now and then, right? It's like, oh, this company scaled up to X million in revenue and like exited this fast, got acquired this fast. And I think I will say, from like being in my seat now as a freight tech founder, my thoughts and opinions on success have changed, and how I sort of, think about like our state of our business in regards to other tech companies and all that kind of stuff. But, you said progress will be slower, and it sounds like you're pretty accepting of that. Are you good from like, one business owner to another? How good are you of just like blocking out that noise? Because I'm
It's a
sure, like,
daily.
I'm sure if you're intense, because I would say I'm pretty intense too. Like, I'm a little bit more reserved about it, but I'm like very competitive deep down.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, going back to it, are you good about just like blocking that stuff out and just running your own race?
I am my own worst critic. So it's always the inner voice, right, that's beating me up. Nobody outside of me is telling me that I'm going too slow. Nobody is telling me that we're going to fall behind. It's only in my head. And so, like I said, it's a tension, right, that I have to deal with every single day. I do think it's getting easier over time. When we first started, I started out the way that I wanted to end up when we acquired this business. So I started at 20 hours a week, even though I jumped in head first. I only let myself do that because I know how slippery of a slope that is.
Hmm.
So that was really, really hard because you can
Can imagine.
imagine, right? Like I'm basically a toddler walking into this company and I have no idea anything about this industry, anything. I honestly, I still couldn't sling freight. You know what I mean? If somebody, I'm sure if I sat down and applied myself, I could.
Yeah.
Um, but I ask stupid questions of my people all the time to this day. But I knew that if I didn't set those boundaries right away and allowed myself to be uncomfortable like that, I would fall right into the patterns of many, many entrepreneurs before us, right? Where all of a sudden they're fully consumed. They're working before they get up practically. They're working after everybody goes to sleep. And don't get me wrong, there are times that that has been our life. It's just more keeping that the exception versus the rule. But no, it's not easy, Josh. It doesn't feel pleasant sometimes, especially right now. Like, I feel like after 3.5 years of owning this business, I finally understand enough to start really exploring what sort of efficiencies we can create here at Transport Express. We have an amazing group of people that are insanely tenured. I mean, we're talking 20 plus years for almost every broker that I have of experience within the industry. These guys have been doing this forever and they know it. And they know the TE way. They don't necessarily know what's outside of it. And my job, the way that, Amanda and I view our roles as like the owners and the leaders of this company, is to create any efficiency that we can for our people through automation, through technology. But until you understand what you're actually automating or supporting with technology, you can't have productive conversations in that realm. And so for me, it's like, okay, I feel like I'm finally like getting it. And I can only take so many meetings a week. So I have to be okay not moving at the breakneck pace that I naturally want to revert to. But that is also working to make me a better leader, Josh. Like I have steamrolled so many people in the past as a leader because I'm like, I see the way, let's go. And I'm just like, go get on board or get run over. It's your choice.
Hmm.
Um, that doesn't work super well, right? Humans don't like that. It doesn't create the solution that I think that it will. And so having to gentle my approach because of these boundaries that I've set, I'm just leaning into the value that that's creating and how it's growing me as a leader and creating more opportunity for being curious about why my people do things the way that they do them. Like, there's obviously a reason. Tell me why. I don't want to just assume that you're doing it because you don't know better. I want to know why you decided to do it this way and then see if I can support that why with more efficiencies. So kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but it's short answer. It's not comfortable. I still struggle with it every day, but it's like a muscle, right? When that voice crops up and says you should be doing more, I say nope, because I just went to 3 baseball games in the last 2 days, and I got to watch my kid hit a home run. And and we ate a homemade meal. Like, yeah, it was made 2 days prior, so we could pull it out of the refrigerator while we're on the run. But, I have to remind myself that these are important things. And
Yeah.
these are the things that are getting done. And stuff is still happening at the business. We are still making progress.
Yep. And I mean, at the end of the day, you're working for a purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're doing that to fulfill that purpose. I think it's interesting too, like where my brain goes when I hear that you work 20 hours a week, is that I would assume like from a time management standpoint, it makes you just be pretty hyper efficient, right? Because you have to
Mm-hmm.
sit there and say, okay, cool. I've got a very short period of time, because candidly in freight, it's very easy to spend 20 hours in 2 days in this, in this space and just be like locked in. But I would also say on my, like from some experience on my side too, is like sometimes you could be putting in all those hours, and the question is like, are you actually, like, are some of them even necessary?
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that's like work a shorter amount of time period, but I will say, like, I've got certain documents and reminders and stuff that I put in front of my face of just like, I call them RGAs, but like revenue generating activities, because I've had weeks before where sometimes I look back and I'm like, what did I really just get done? What did I really do? And like with some of this stuff, even fully necessary. Um, but I think even just like taking your approach, it's got to be a good challenge for yourself to say, okay, great, like wherever that time's invested in, and if I only have X amount, it's got to be pretty good. Um, I would, it sounds like it would be a good exercise, I would assume, going into each week for you, of just, this is where it's got to go.
Yes, I have, I call it my brain, but and I have a shameless plugger of this. It's called the Remarkable, and it's a
I've
digital
heard about
notebook.
those.
Oh,
Yep.
I love it. As somebody whose brain is kind of always going like this, it really helps me. So I have like a monthly to-do list. I have annual goals that I write down, and then within those, I have the ability to kind of like parcel it out as to like what the steps are. And I've set a routine for myself. So every night before I go to bed, I review what was on my to-do list for today. And then I look at what the to-do list for the week is. And then I look at my schedule for the next day, and I figure out what's actually going to make sense between meetings. Like, what is something I can accomplish? Because as there's lots of things that you don't get to check the box for months and months and months, right? And it's super easy to lose sight of those things, right? Where you're waiting on an email, you're waiting on a response, you're waiting on a review, something like that. So, in order to be as efficient as possible with my 20 hours, I do have systems in place. And then, Monday morning I wake up or Monday morning or every morning I wake up, and then I look at what I wrote down the night before. I kind of reevaluate. So I'm in the office 20 hours, but when I'm walking on the treadmill in the morning, that's when I'm doing like my LinkedIn and my article review and listening to podcasts and, trying to, leverage that time as best I can, while I'm also managing the children, getting ready for school. So it's, sometimes I get more, sometimes I get less. But yeah, no, I have to be really intentional. And I think that's kind of the word that most makes sense with this style that I've approached within my schedule and kind of holding these boundaries is intention. When I stop doing those intentional planning steps, everything goes to hell. Like, it will implode. It's just, it happens. And that happens, right?
Yep.
Like, I'm
It's part of
human.
it.
Sometimes I'm like, I don't wanna. Or sometimes I stay up too late and I don't get up and do my morning stuff.
Hmm.
And then I have to kind of scramble to catch up and forgive myself, be gentle with myself, right? And be like, okay, the world is not going to explode if you don't get this
Yeah.
done today. I'm not
Said
somebody
that
who
a few
needs to be
times.
motivated, right? Like, I'm the person that needs to like realize that nothing's going to blow up if I don't do everything I put on my to-do list. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
What was the reception when you and Amanda took over, met the team for the first time? Tell me about that.
Oh God. We So the owner, we had obviously kind of signed him on to like a decreasing scale of time with us. We knew that we needed him. He unfortunately had a major lifestyle shift right after we bought the business, like found out some bad news about somebody in his life that he's a caretaker for. And he's like, I'm out. I got to go take care of these people. And so we had him for 5 days instead of 6 months. And thankfully, he wasn't lying when he said he wasn't part of the day-to-day operations of this business. Like, most times when you acquire a business, especially smaller businesses, what I've been told is that the owners don't realize how like entwined they are in everything that goes on. And then they leave, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, 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 there's all these gaps that have to be filled. And you're like, I
Hmm.
thought I was just coming in as, like supervisory oversight or like the CEO. And so we were really fortunate in the fact that he wasn't lying. He really wasn't. And so we have an amazing general manager and accounting manager. They were terrified. Everybody was terrified. We scared the crap out of them. I walked in, and I think at the time my hair was purple, blue, and green. So, they're like, oh my God, I've been home with my kids for 8.5 years. So nice to meet you guys. Like, so, um, you know, and then Amanda, so my
Oh.
business partner, she's amazing, but her previous experience, she was 10 years a paramedic. So, I mean, girl understands dispatching. She understands high pressure situations. She is cool as a cucumber. She keeps me level, which is fantastic because I'm like, wow. And then she's like, well, what if we looked at it from this way? She's the yin to my yang, is what I like to say. We balance each other, but we scared the pants off of everybody. We actually had, and this is something that in the next business acquisition I will definitely learn from. We had employee agreements drafted prior to acquisition because we have some very high performers here, and we bought a transportation brokerage, which is completely intangible. There's no assets. Like the office space is rented. There's no building. There's computers and desks. That's about it. And then the relationships that our brokers have with the shippers, because we are cradle to grave. That's a really big deal. I needed these brokers to feel secure and to not leave. So we drafted employee agreements that kind of put us at ease and put them at ease too, because their fear was that we were going to come in and be like, oh, you're making so much money. You're fired. This new guy is going to come in and work for 15% of what you're making. Valid fear, right? I mean, it was a valid fear, but in the employee agreements, there are some terms that I would definitely reconsider in the next acquisition if we're put in a similar position. But it gave us some security that we knew these people weren't going to just walk, because if they walked, we would have some recourse. I know there was tears. I know that the GM, she called the previous owner and was like, I can't do this. I can't do it. And he's like, no, I promise. They're good people. Like, just stick it through. Didn't help either that we acquired November 5th and peak here starts halfway through November. So we also walked in, there was a misrepresentation of the amount of capital that would be required from an operating standpoint when we stepped in the door.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. Yeah, it was very, we didn't pay ourselves for a solid year. Amanda and I, we showed up 4 days a week because she does the same thing. She doesn't work on Fridays. And we showed up for a year and learned this, and we didn't pay ourselves a penny except for what was necessary to cover tax obligations as, the owners of this company. So that was a lot. Our people were terrified, and then we got into it and we're like, oh my gosh, how did we miss this? Or how did we misunderstand how this? Because you're like, yeah, they pay me, I pay them. Simple concept, right? Well, not everybody follows terms, but in order to maintain our credit rating, we have to follow our terms with our carriers, right, and take care of them. So that was a really interesting year. I remember playing payables roulette, almost, is what I want to call it. Like, we would print physical checks, and I would assess where we were at, with each carrier. Like, okay, how can we push this? Like, who do we have to pay? Who can we maybe pay in 2 days? Like, every day I was checking our cash flow and assessing like whose bills we could pay. And our largest customer, that after that post-peak season, they changed their payables software and we're $1.5 million 90 days past due. So it's been an interesting ride. That first year was really crazy.
I can imagine.
So then, not even, our back office people, we're maintaining 2 sets of books because the previous owner was still due the revenue from the loads that hadn't necessarily paid, right? There was all the stuff that had been invoiced up until the date of acquisition. And so, like, figuring out, okay, so it's this QuickBooks account and then it's this QuickBooks account. And it was a rough ride. I mean, and I do have to say, I think one of my biggest takeaways when I'm trying to assess if I'm the leader that I want to be is that we didn't lose a single person through this acquisition. Like, not everybody was under these employee agreements. There was plenty of freedom for people to go if they chose to, and nobody did. So
what did you do to try to earn their trust? I mean, obviously, what's being talked about behind closed doors and talking with the previous owner and the transition and everything. But what did that look like for you? What did you feel that you needed to do?
I had to be really vulnerable. I had to be super honest about the fact that I had no idea what was going on. Um, and as somebody who really prides herself in understanding a lot of things, that was hard. But it was the only way to gain their trust. Because if I would have come in and I would have said, "Ugh, I know how to do this better," that would have been awful. Nobody would
Yeah.
have believed me. Everybody would have resisted. Like, I had to show them that I wanted to understand how Transport Express operated, right? And we said, actually, I committed to them verbally. I said, I'm not going to change a thing for at least 12 months until, like, I want to know how an entire year flows in the way that you guys have been doing this before we even discuss any sort of adjustments from a tech standpoint, from a process standpoint, before we add to staff, anything like that. That was probably a little crazy and naive on my part. I don't know a lot of people who would acquire a business and take that approach, but we had no idea what we were stepping into.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say it's the right approach, right? Because I think those that go into businesses and they just try to, I don't know, like start weed whacking and basically just acting like they know what they're doing. And
Mm-hmm.
I even think this is the same with brokerage in general, because like you see a lot of leaders kind of go from one company to another, but cultures are still very differently. The way people operate are very different. Like their SOPs are different. And there's definitely this prideful thing where it's like my way is the golden way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just like not taking the approach to try to understand and see somebody's perspective. Like that was the one thing I would say that was really enjoyable for me coming into freight from Tesla, was like I had no idea how this whole thing worked. And I just was like, all right, I just want to shadow the top people that we had at our company, which at that, the company was growing really fast, the first brokerage that I was at. Um, but the one thing that I just consistently saw was everybody just kind of like ran their own book of business, their own unique way, and we had people that came from a lot of the top brokerages all over the country. And yeah, for me, that was just kind of like fun to learn the experience. But I just know that if I came in there from Tesla, for example, it's just like, this is the way that we're going to sell and do things, it would have been a nightmare, because the people in this industry also, they don't bite their tongue. Like they will shoot you very straight and they're very direct, which I
Yeah.
really appreciate. And I think it
Mm-hmm.
also, kind of adds to the fun of it. Um, but no, that's pretty interesting. Just kind of hearing that piece, because I've had a couple of those experiences before taking over teams, and it's not the most comfortable thing. Um, like when I moved up to here from into Nashville from Atlanta, and like met the new team when I was working for Tesla, I was 24 years old. I was probably the youngest manager they had across the whole nation. And I remember just like walking through like sales and then operations and service, and just like the looks on their faces were like, this is the guy. But for me, I'm like, you got to go prove yourself, so I'm going to go show them, because like I had sales experience within Tesla and all that stuff. And I don't know, it's just it's not the easiest thing. So it's kind of interesting. I feel like there's some parallels there from like what you've experienced and what I've experienced a little bit too.
Yeah, Josh, I had a mid-level management role, like before we had our kids, and I kind of took my hiatus from working outside of the home. And my team, I was 26 when I took the role, and I was managing a team of like 15 people that were my parents' age that had been doing this job like their entire working career. And I went in, I was like, they hired me for a reason. I've got an outside perspective. I see how things should be done. And I went in with that kind of a mindset. And so when I say steamroll, I mean like I literally, like, I made them cry, they made me cry. It was ugly.
Rough.
And that's where, learning from that and then not taking that approach
Not
here,
doing that
right?
again.
No, we're going to try a different way. Like, they're still crying, but it wasn't the same amount or for the same reasons.
Yeah, that stuff's it's it's an experience. Tell us a little bit about Transport Express. What do you guys specialize in?
I would say our biggest specialty is the fact that we are primarily spot, but we're like very diverse. So we have stuff in the mail sector, we have stuff in like the promotional marketing materials sector. We have a cold chain sector. We have household goods for military moves. I'm trying to think, what are our big ones? Oh, like projects. We do some like agriculture projects. So we have, that idea of like everybody works their book of business like their own way. And that has been wonderfully fostered here by the previous owner and the culture and like this ownership that our brokers feel, which is another reason I don't think we'll move away from this cradle to grave model, even though I know a lot of other brokerages are seeing the value there. We are just leaning into what we're good at. We are small, we are agile, we have a large network of carriers that we have done business with over the years. And so just tightening that up and actually creating some like SOPs, that would be nice. You know what I mean? Like that's sort of what we're working on right now. Like, okay, cool, we get it. We're not changing what we're doing. I'm just going to define it. That's what we're trying to do. All of our brokers, except for one, are remote. So that's been another challenge, right? You talked about going and sitting with these brokers, like, let me just shadow you. So I would go and I would drive out to people's houses and I would sit in their basements with them and watched how they did their thing. Wow. And tried to take notes on like what worked for this person and is it something we could translate for, this person, even though it's not the exact same, vertical. What can we use to kind of help each other out? But yeah, no, we're small and agile, and the whole not contracted freight thing freaked me out for a super long time because I like security. I like to know what is coming. I love contracts. I love agreements. Clear is kind is one of my favorite sayings. So if we've got something in writing, that's about as clear as I think it can get. Mm-hmm. But no, it's spot. We're remote, and we're looking to grow. We're trying to figure out what the best model of that is, right? Like getting a cradle to grave broker is hard because there's something to be said for this type of position that requires an entrepreneurial spirit. You have to be willing to do the whole thing yourself, and that there's internal motivation there. There's a willingness to pay attention to the details and do the mundane. So it's been kind of interesting over the last 3.5 years trying to find people that make sense for Transport Express and that would make sense within our culture.
I'm sure you've had a couple of things that have been beneficial just from an outsider's perspective, right? For people that have probably grown up only in this industry and stuff. What have been one or two of the things that you've brought to your team that you would say has made a positive impact from, hey, like they only saw things this way, but now, and I'm sure obviously there's a little bit of both, right? There's also stuff probably from their seat where you've had your eyes open a little bit, but what have been one or two of the things that you've sort of brought to the team that you feel has changed perspective and made a positive impact on the team?
I had a really good answer to this question, but I was like brushing my teeth when it came to me and I didn't write it down and it is like completely fallen out of my head.
Oh, no worries.
So there is something to be said for, in our naivety, like we had to ask questions that these people haven't had to answer like outright. Mm-hmm. There's just this understanding that has existed for a really long time. Like everybody just, that's how we do it. And I'm like, well, why? Right. So I think that has been really beneficial in like, right now we're discussing some things from an accounting, like bookkeeping standpoint. And I'm like, well, why do we do it that way? Because that's creating all of this manual process. And they're like, well, that's because that's how Nick wanted it. I'm like, okay, well, why? And they're like, well, he was tired of us having to explain X, Y, and Z every single month when we went over the financials. And I was like, well, I know because you tell me, like having the story is enough for me. So is this a valid why anymore to create, you know what I mean? Like from a manual process versus an automation standpoint, if this is the barrier to us being able to automate this, does it matter enough to me to keep it the way that it was? And I think that's just, an example of we're like, well, why do you do it that way? And they would have to explain things that they haven't had to explain for a long time, right? And I think that's just a good exercise in reviewing processes and assumptions that we just kind of don't even know that we've made and then continue to base decisions off of.
Gotcha. One thing that I will say has been impressive about you, at least, has been that you've sought out mentors and coaches and consultants in the industry. You just seem to be a sponge. I don't think there's any other way to put it. How helpful has that been for you?
Oh my God, so helpful. I mean, I will say that our first attempt at finding somebody to advise us was really expensive and a massive failure. Like hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on an immersive consulting project that took up
Mm,
about 15 weeks. And the value that we got out of that, I just can't even pretend anymore that there was value aside from just the learning. They were outside of the industry. And that is one thing that I will say I don't know that I will do again, given my lack of industry knowledge. I have to find mentors and consultants and advisors that know more than I do about transportation.
right.
But last year, so the TIA Capital Ideas Conference of 2024 was the first one that Amanda and I attended because we just didn't even feel like we understood the language well enough to come prior to that. And I'm so glad we came. That's part of how we met, right, Josh?
Yep.
I walked up in all my bravado and who I am, and I walked up to Jim Kenny and I said, "Hey, I've got a question for you." And he goes, I asked him my question, and he's like, "That is not a 10-minute answer. Here's my card. Say it's Lacey with the purple hair, and I will give you some time." And that has just been a major catalyst for me and Amanda in getting connected within the industry. We met you, we knew we needed a CRM and we were trying to create one with another company, and it was just so involved. And we had to create this tool that I didn't even feel like I had enough knowledge
Hmm.
to tell them what we wanted. So we were working with a consulting firm to help us design this, but they didn't fully understand the cradle to grave model versus the split model, versus
Oh,
the other stuff that's out there. It's just really frustrating.
yeah.
We're spending all this money. And so, I mean, one of my biggest lessons from that is pivot. There's no shame in walking away from a solution that you figure out is not actually what you're looking for. You know what I mean? And so we pivoted to you with Sales Dash, and you had a product that just it fit, right? We didn't have to
Mhm.
adjust it. It was simple. We didn't need bells and whistles. You're doing amazing stuff. I'm very excited with every new thing that you guys are putting out there. But if I wouldn't have walked up to Jim, he wouldn't have heard my struggles, and I wouldn't have met you, and we wouldn't be utilizing Sales Dash now. And it's something that fits who we are. It fits our model. It fits our price point. All of those things. And so we actually, last summer, in our search for kind of like a business coach for me and Amanda that is industry specific, we decided to go the route of fractional sales leadership. So we don't have a sales manager within the current org structure at Transport Express because these people were making the money, they were doing the thing. They didn't need to be managed in the way that I think a sales manager kind of comes alongside of newer brokers when they're in their building phase. Kind of giving them more resources, making sure that the training is happening as it should be, encouraging them because it can be really discouraging. So that was just sort of, we had 2 new brokers and there was nobody to guide them. And I didn't feel like I was equipped to do that. I've never worked sales in my life, neither has Amanda. I'm like, I don't know, how hard is it? Pick up the phone. I'm learning that it's not that simple.
Yeah.
But yes, to your point, I can't do this without the outside resources. And attending the conferences, we've gone to 2 different regional TIA events, and just the more people we meet, the more we learn. I mean, I feel like in the last year, we have accomplished more and learned more by seeking out that coaching and that mentorship and networking and meeting other people within the industry. We've learned more in the last year than we did in the first 2.5 from an industry standpoint. You know what I mean? Those first 2.5 years we were learning Transport Express, right?
Yep.
And how we did things. And now I'm looking out, I'm on a network, like a leadership cohort that meets once a month, and we just talk about compensation, we talk about contracts, we talk about stuff from an executive level. And I'm talking to peers, which is fantastic because I love hearing what other brokerages are doing, because some of that fits and some of it doesn't, right? And it gives me more to go off of than just, this is the way it's always been done at Transport Express. Because, again, pivot, right? If this doesn't work, there's no shame in that. Let's figure out what does. We don't need
Right.
to throw the whole thing out, but where can we adjust?
Hmm.
that'll give us some wins, that'll create some space. I mean, operational processes take up so much time for my brokers. They don't want to let them go. And I'm like, okay, within those things that you want to maintain on your desk, how can I make that as efficient as possible and create as much space in your day as possible for those revenue generating activities, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it,
There's a lot there. Like even when you're in the beginning, when you were talking, like about the outside consultancy, I
Mhm.
feel like one thing that a lot of people, and I think it takes time for you to get into, you brought up the financials earlier about not knowing, maybe it was around like payables and all this stuff for carriers, or like, hey, for the previous owner and all that stuff. But so many people, and it even seems like with who's been invested in the industry from like outside investors, is like they pay so much attention to the revenue, and not the profit, right? And then also
Mhm.
just the days to pay, and like, are you actually getting paid, and like your credit rating and all those kinds of different factors. Um, I feel like it just takes time, I think, for people to get into it. It definitely took me some time from like my experience with my first brokerage, even transitioning into the second one. Like the first one was very revenue driven. The second one was very much like profitable freight. And I also
Mm.
feel like the more and more I talk with some of the smaller brokerages and whatnot, it's really interesting because everybody wants to go after the large, big logos, the big accounts and all that stuff. But I mean, at the end of the day, like the larger that pool is, and if you know how that their freights run, significantly reduces the margins that's on that stuff. And like, you've got to have the technology at that point then, right? Because then at that point with the smaller margins, you need more volume. So it doesn't, for a smaller brokerage, like, does it make the most sense to do that? It's a big question. But it's interesting because it's a chess game. Like you get to choose like what
Mhm.
you go after, but you also, like you mentioned, have to be smart about like, hey, where do we sort of either cut the losses or just say this is maybe just no longer the path that we need to go down.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think too, we don't go for the big stuff. I'm like, you guys, that's not who we are. That's not what we lean into. Like, this we are a single point of contact service company. I'm not going to get the Coca-Colas or, those larger corporations. That's not what we're designed for. Like none of our processes could support that, even with tech.
Mm-hmm.
And those aren't the people that value us and what we're bringing to the table, right? Like I always give the example, I have my preferred banking institution. And you know why? It's because when I call Bob. And Bob's like, hey, Lacey, what up? I got you. And he makes it happen. And I just view us as being that same type of service provider. Somebody calls and they're like, Tommy. And Tommy's like, yep, I got you. And that's all they have to do. And so those big guys, that's not who we're aiming at, and from a standpoint of like, are we focused on revenue? Are we focused on profit? I mean, bottom line, baby, right? Like the net income is what ultimately matters in order for keeping us afloat and sustainable. But, in this market, this is really hard. It's really saturated. Our people are doing the things, and there's just not that much to get out there right now. It's a timing thing. So I'm like, all right, you guys, because we bought in 2021, right? You guys remember the prices in 2021? They were great. Like we lost $9 million in revenue in the first year. Not because we lost customers, not because we lost load volume. It's because the market prices shifted that much. And so we've had to kind of slice and dice our numbers to understand if we're actually successful as a company in a very different way. So we are looking at unique customers. How many customers do we have? If that number is increasing and our load volume is increasing, that to me is a win, right? Like our profit margin, we might not hit exactly where we want to be, but did we bring in more loads? Did we create more relationships? So then we are set up and we have a foundation for when the market starts to come back up, right? So when things shift, we're not losing ground here. Our revenue might not be like showing that exactly the same way that we would like it to, but the health of our business, I feel like, is more based on how many customers we have and what our load volume is. So, and I've had to do that because I've had lots of freakouts because, we had a 26% loss in revenue. I think it was the beginning of 2023. And, when we acquired the business, there's debt involved in that, right? We financed
Mm-hmm.
it. So we also had a situation where we were being pinched on both sides. So the market was dropping and interest rates were rising. We went from 4.5% interest to 10% interest in the span of 18 months.
Sheesh.
So it's been a wild ride.
Yeah.
And like we like to tell people we suck less than average, right? You know what I mean? Because our loss in revenue was less bad than the average loss in revenue, across the industry.
Oh man. That's such a good phrase. I gotta steal that one. I feel like I could definitely say that in the CRM space. Um, all right, I got some rapid fire questions. I know for the sake of time here, we're coming up on time. This has been good so far. What what is your most enjoyable part of the business?
I think the fact that it's never the same. Like I'm always learning something to you. You say I'm a sponge. Like I told my dad from a young age, I was like, I want to be a professional student. And he's like, I'll pay for your undergrad and then you're on your own. So this is a way for me to constantly learn while making some money, right?
And
Instead of
you will forever
costing money.
learn.
Always. Everybody says that. Like
Yes.
once you're in, you're stuck because it's always changing.
Yep. I had one of those situations. It was literally within my first 90 days. I'm going around the office and I'm asking everybody, what do you do in this situation? I don't want to talk about it like on the podcast here, but nobody had an answer across our Nashville office and Chicago office. And I was like, oh, great. Well, at least I'll be the first one, I guess. And, my first 90 days, this is fantastic. So, what would you say is your current biggest bottleneck or challenge right now?
Oh God. I want to say probably me, in the sense that with my only going to give 20 hours a week, right? So as we get to, decision making, like we're looking at various tech things that we could apply here. And there's just only so many hours in the day, right, for me to review things. So unfortunately, I think that's probably my biggest bottleneck is me.
Wow.
And
Didn't
being okay
expect
with that, right, Josh? Like
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking about. Like if you were to ask somebody else in my business, I don't think they would say that. But that's just my take on it.
Wow. Yeah, did not expect that answer. Recruiting and hiring. You mentioned people earlier. I think this is a people-driven industry. How involved are you in the recruiting and hiring?
I have actually asked Amanda to take that on and lead that. I don't like doing that part. I like people.
What's the main? So when you guys are seeing, because this would probably be interesting, especially coming from outside. But what do you feel is like one of the main qualities that somebody needs to have for somebody that you want to bring on your team at Transport Express?
It's that entrepreneurial spirit. Somebody that has all the makings of an entrepreneur, but doesn't want to just go out there and do it on their own. They're looking for, something a little bit more consistent, a little bit more secure, within which they can act as an entrepreneur.
And then lastly, what are you most excited about for going into the second half of this year for your business?
Oh my God. Well, the second half of our year is typically where most of our profits come in. So I'm excited that our first half of the year has exceeded expectations. And so I'm just really hoping that continues through. Yeah, and honestly, I'm excited that hopefully midsummer we will have started implementing some of these new tech solutions and actually realizing some of the efficiencies that they offer.
Love it. Yeah, there's a lot of tech out there right now. Our last question, what on the tech side, what are you most intrigued by? You don't have to name names or anything, but just like in terms of the division, impact, problem it solves, like what's been sort of intriguing to you?
I would say the biggest thing that has intrigued me right now with some of the stuff that we're looking at is reducing the windows that my people have to have open, and this idea of centralizing everything into one main space. So email integration, CRM integration, QuickBooks integration, all of that, trying to get stuff on one page for my people. Because I don't know about you, but I'm really tired of remembering passwords and logins and just That's 5
It's
to
a lot.
7, it takes up time, right?
Yeah,
So minimizing those clicks and those windows open for my people is really, and creating automation in manual processes that don't need to stay manual anymore.
fair enough. Yeah, I will say, I never went to a TIA when I was in brokerage, or any of these conferences. And I will say that from going to a couple of the tech only ones, but also just seeing how many tech vendors there are, there's a lot. And I say this all the time. I'm like, I mean, we're all fighting for real estate space on the laptop and on the computer, and that's got to be a challenge. And like, we all have to understand that as tech vendors. Um, and yeah, like one of my questions I like to ask the vendors is like, are you, for example, with the TMS, like, are you trying to just interface within the TMS, outside the TMS? Because I feel like that's really important for what you just mentioned about the tabs piece. Because a lot of brokers just don't want to leave their TMS, you
Yep.
know? Um, so yeah, that's pretty interesting. That's cool.
Well, and I think, Josh, like we've talked about this, like tracking quotes,
Hmm.
like that idea of having an email integration that allows for the emails that come in to then be like classified as quotes within your system without
Yeah.
having your person have to enter it into a separate system. I mean, that right there, from a reporting standpoint, a conversion rate, percentage, all of that, like without creating more work for my people. That's something that I would really, really love.
Yeah. No, makes sense.
Hmm.
Well, Lacey, if anybody was interested getting in touch with you, or potentially your team, maybe they're a broker or agent that's interested in Transport Express, like what would be the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, you can shoot me an email. LaceyO@transportexpress.com is my direct email. It's LACEY. And then otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn. Again, Lacey Olson. Pretty easy to find me. And if you see me in person, I'm about 6 foot tall and I got long blue hair, right? So
Can't miss her with the hair. She's easy to
can't miss
spot
me.
out. It's honestly one of the best parts about the conference is Lacey's very easy to find. Uh,
I threw it out there as a challenge to the networking cohort that I was part of. I was like, if you see me, say hi. And I had, I think, 4 different people come up and be like, I was told to say hi to the 6 foot tall blue haired lady. And I was
there we
like, yes,
go.
you were.
So good. Well, Lacey, I really appreciate you taking the time to share a little bit more of your story and whatnot. Yeah, it's always fun to catch up regardless, and kind of hear about how the journey's going and stuff. But much respect for everything that you're going for. And I know, honestly, it was also really good too to kind of hear about how you balance this with family. Because honestly, I didn't know it to those depths. You and I haven't had a chance to have that conversation. So that's what also makes this fun, is to learn that a little bit more, because I think we can all take a different perspective, as we're approaching on like how we're going towards our business, but also understanding, the big purpose of why we're doing it in the first place. So really appreciate that, because I'm taking some stuff away from it myself.